Vernee has put out another smartphone, and this one is actually under $100, making it a pretty interesting smartphone, especially given the fact that it sports a 5-inch display with an octa-core processor and 3GB of RAM. But how does it stack up against the competition? Hey everyone, this is Alex from Android Headlines, and let's jump into the full review of the Vernee Thor smartphone. Now starting off with the hardware, the Vernee Thor has quite a bit going for it. We're looking at a 5-inch 720p display powered by the MediaTek MT6753, which is their octa-core 1.3 GHz processor. Now that's paired with 3GB of RAM and 16GB of internal storage. We also have a 13 megapixel sensor on the back with a 2 megapixel front facing camera. Now all of this is powered by a non-removable 2800 mAh battery. While specs are definitely somewhere on the high end of the mid-range spectrum, the build quality is right about there as well. The frame and back are made of a soft touch plastic material that we've seen on other smartphones like the Nexus 5. Now the back cover is removable, and beneath the back cover you'll find the dual SIM card slot along with microSD card slot. Since the back is removable, it makes the phone feel a bit more cheap than it actually should. But that isn't really something surprising, seeing as we've seen that with other smartphones that have a removable back. Now the display here is a 720p display, but it also uses Gorilla Glass 3 and it's 2.5D glass, which gives it a slight curve on the edges. Now this makes it look like a really nice looking device, even though it is still somewhat small and it is a 720p display. Now given that this is a 5-inch display, the Thor still has 294 pixels per inch. Not quite as good as those QHD displays out there, but it could definitely be worse. And one of the main questions about a smartphone with a 720p display nowadays is, can you see the pixels? And the answer is no, and that's not really surprising given how small the display actually is. Now the display takes up about 70% of the front of the device, meaning that it's mostly display and very little bezels. Now, speaking of bezels, the chin on the Thor is pretty big. Now this is due to the fact that the Thor has 3 capacitive buttons. Now there's a home button in the middle, which is a square, and then there are 2 buttons on either side, which are just dots. Now the left side is menu and the right side is the back key. Unfortunately, they're not customizable, which is a bit surprising given that the buttons are just dots and not an actual back arrow or menu icon. Now the speaker on the Thor sits on the back side of the device. Now this isn't the most ideal place for a speaker, but it still fares pretty well. Now when holding the device, you do need to be careful and to cup the speaker so that the sound doesn't come out muffled. Vernee does include a fingerprint sensor here on the Thor. It's located on the back, just below the camera. And to be honest, it's not that great. Oftentimes when I go to unlock the Thor with the fingerprint sensor, I have to do it several times, or it times out and I have to put in my PIN to unlock the device. Not the best experience for using a fingerprint sensor, however the silver lining here is that it does support the fingerprint API from Google since it is running Android 6.0 Marshmallow. Now when it comes to battery life, the Thor performs pretty well. Given that it does have a somewhat small 2800 mAh battery inside, the Thor can last you all day long without much trouble. We're able to get under 4 hours on screen time, but if we really pushed it, we could likely get a lot more than that. Now there's no quick charging included, which may be a downside for some. Now where the battery is just a 2800 mAh battery, it's still pretty quick to charge up. Now the software here on the Vernee Thor is quite familiar. It's essentially stock Android 6.0 Marshmallow. Vernee hasn't added much of anything to the software here. In fact, the only real changes we see are a couple of pre-installed apps. Now we have backup and storage, does about what you're expected to do. It backs up and restores your data. Of course you do need an SD card to be able to use that. And the other one is a FM radio, so you'll be able to plug in your headphones and you'll be able to listen to your local radio stations without using any data. Now that's something that's really popular in emerging markets, which is where the Vernee Thor is targeting. Now instead of using Google search to the search bar on the home screen, which is not removable, this is Vernee's own search, which will search your phone as well as the web. It's not terrible, but we would prefer Google search there instead. Additionally, there's no way to get to Google Now without opening the Google app or installing the Google Now launcher. While these may be considered first world problems, for someone that heavily uses Google and Google Now, they are definitely things to be considered. Surprisingly, the camera is quite good here on the Thor. We were pretty impressed with the 13 megapixel sensor on the back side of the device. We got some pretty great shots from the Thor, both inside and outside. Unlike other smartphones we've tested recently, the Thor did not blow out some colors in pictures taken outdoors. That's definitely a nice thing to see on phones these days. Now the camera experience is pretty plain. There's not a whole lot going for it here. It's mostly a stock Android experience. But the pictures that it puts out are still really great. Now it's not going to stack up to smartphones like the HTC 10, the Galaxy S7, or the LG G5. But for a $100 smartphone, you don't really expect it to compete with a $700 plus smartphone. So for $100 it's still really impressive. Now the smartphone is available in China. There's no plans to bring it to the US and a lot of other markets, unfortunately. But since it is a Chinese smartphone, it will support the bands in Europe, seeing as most carriers in Europe use the same bands as Asia, so they're pretty much interchangeable. For the US, we're out of luck. As you can see probably through the video, our SIM card isn't even in there, and that is because it won't even connect to the voice network on T-Mobile for some reason. The Vernee Thor is available now for just $99, and we have a link down below if you want to purchase it. Now the Vernee Thor is definitely an interesting device, and one that is quite good, to be honest. If you're looking for a cheap and small smartphone that does all of the basics, it's hard to look elsewhere and find something better. If you haven't read our written review, that is also linked down below in the description. Now make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.